What are geriatric Zhongli's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. The best thing about our beloved Geo Archon, who we all know and love, is that his shielding is literally ridiculous. You set up this man's shield, and you will be protected from just about anything and anyone. If you're somebody who has a horrible case of skill issue, then Zhongli is certainly the right pick for you. He lets you execute your combos with a lot more sloppiness, so you're not as punished as badly with knockback or damage loss if you make a mistake when playing. He's genuinely a super comfortable slot in general, and removes any layer of stress that you may have while playing a unit. He works really well as a pair of training wheels too, if you will. For example, let's say that you want to learn how to play either Ganyu or Lini. Both of them have very strong shieldless teams. But if you don't feel ready to play those yet, then you can always opt to play them with Zhongli instead to better learn their gameplay. Then, once you feel trained up enough, you can go and play the harder team options. I will warn you that Zhongli can become somewhat of a crutch if you really hate dodging. So try to still actively engage in gameplay and use the shieldless training wheel so that you don't become numb to playing shieldless teams. Unless you don't care about that, then go right ahead since shielded impact is a very comfortable existence indeed. The value of his shield really kicks in when this freaking boss is in the abyss. The Copper Duo is such an irritating combo regardless of which dirge it's set on, and it can really screw you up when you're just trying to spam away with your Arlecchino, for instance. You can save yourself from pulling out a lot of hair by simply bringing along the almighty Rex Lapis. Not to mention how that, because he's such a flexible everyman in terms of team building, if there's an abyss where you'd really want to have Geo for a certain half, sticking the old lizard at the end of your team remedies any problems you may have in that regard, because his big pillar and meteorite can crush Geo shields in no time. Certainly a shielder to be reckoned with. However, shielding isn't all that this legendary dragon is able to provide. The man offers utility in spades. For instance, one of the best qualities about this guy is that he offers a 20% universal res shred to anybody that is protected by a shield. Yes, this affects the likes of Dendro and Anemo, making it one of the more unique buffs of this variety. While this cannot compete with using an actual buffer or debuffer, it's certainly more than enough to give him the edge over the other shielder characters. He's able to hold 4-piece Archaic Petra too, which is a splendid buffing set. The main negative is that Zhongli has to actually collect the elemental crystals themselves, but if you do manage to do so, then you'll be good to go. This is an especially nice set to utilize in Nuvolette or mono teams. It also makes him a good double Geo pair with Kachino or Shilunen, since one can hold Cinder City while the dragon holds Petra to avoid having two Cinder users in one team. Otherwise, 4-piece Tenacity is a super consistent buffing option which can give everyone in your team attack percent. Splendid choice for sure. While it may not work in HP scaling teams, it still works in the large majority of his slot-ins. Remember, Zhongli works nearly everywhere, so his quote-unquote slot-ins might as well be up to 90% of the teams in this game. Vlad can hold Favonius Lance too. The fun just never ends with this guy. Pure white energy particles for your whole team, which are splendidly ripe in value. He does all of that on top of providing his crazy shield. Yep. It may not be as good as using a buffer in place of him, sure, especially with how crazy buffers have become these days. However, it's more than enough compensation to avoid having you feel like you're losing out on all of your damage in exchange for greater team protection. This has to be one of the guy's biggest pros in my opinion. He works nearly everywhere. But Juice, you don't really care about versatility. That's true, I much prefer to look at the best in slot options of characters, and I'm not a fan of characters who are versatile only for 90% of those teams to be B tier mid. But the thing is, Zhongli works very well in actually good teams. Hear me out. Arlecchino teams if you're up against the Copper Duo, Lini if you find his shieldless playstyle to be too clunky or difficult, Nuvolette if you're lacking Shilunen and Kachina or are using those two for the other side, or if you simply want an extra added layer of comfort in your team. Mualani if you're finding that the current chamber is working against her ridiculously. You get the idea. It's not like, ah yes, he works with Eula, have fun. It's more like, he's a comfortable alternative for even some of this game's best DPSs at the cost of a chunk of their max potential. He does all that while still working with the good units of this game, the mid units of this game, the bad units of this game. It's very rare in which you find yourself in a scenario where you cannot effectively enjoy his abilities in a team. What he offers is so darn universal to the point where whoever you main can most likely use him. He is arguably one of the most versatile characters in Genshin Impact. The answer to, does my main work with him, is gonna be yes, 99% of the time. Sure, it comes at the cost of max damage performance, but you do get insanely high comfort in exchange. Vlad's as budget-friendly as it gets too. You slap him on a whole crouton of HP, give him a 3-star Black Tassel or a 4-star Favonius Lance, level his skill up to about 8 to 9, if you're crowning his skill then I'm severely concerned for your skill issue, and then he's ready to rumble. That's all you gotta do to make him battle ready. Yep. there's absolutely zero need for additional constellations or weapons in order to make him work in your teams. Now, this is somewhat of a double-edged spear, which I'll get onto later, but for now, all you gotta know is that he is one of the most free-to-play friendly units that you can build, definitely one of the least resource-demanding units out there. Naturally, as the lord of all that is Geo, he has some lovely Geo-Specific Synergies. For instance, he's a splendid sub-DPS in Ito Mono Geo teams. Usually you don't want to build him as a sub-DPS for reasons which I'll get onto later, but here, his burst is not too bad of a downtime filler. You can pair him with Chiori to form a strong double Geo core that can flex onto the end of any team. Using Shilonen will be stronger than using Rex Lapis here. Yet even so, it's a viable plus comfortable option if you're interested. He can work next to Kachina or Shilonen too with the Petra plus Intercity idea that I mentioned earlier. The guy's pretty good with all Geo units, even if he's not the total best in slot for them all. You can use him with Navia, but I have a hard time selling that synergy because Kachina is literally free. So if you're a fan of teams which produce funny brown numbers, then Zhongli might be the one for you. Listen up, mobile users, calling all Genshin players that play on an iPad or phone. People, this character is excellent on mobile devices. Lag and device smoothness is gonna vary from person to person. However, just considering the UI in general, Rex Lapis is such a handy unit to own if you play on mobile. Characters that would normally feel clunky such as C0 Hu Tao become far more comfortable to use, and you'll generally find your experience being enhanced if you're somebody that struggles with playing complicated rotations. He'll still end up being a damage loss on paper. However, I would ask you to consider things from a technical standpoint. If you're having trouble playing the optimal team on mobile, then it'd be more damage for your case in specific to just use Zhongli. Plus, if you have to deal with enemies loading in late and such, then that only makes him better for you. I will say that over time he might fall off for you as you get better at the game, assuming that you don't use him as a total crutch, but you will 100% feel his presence until then. Right, we've said all the good that there is to say about the almighty Geo Archon. Now for the bad. One of the most obvious things that you lose when adding Zhongli to your team is damage. You're trading a potential sub-DPS or buffing support in exchange for defensiveness. He is seldom ever a damage increase over other options in the teams that you put him in. He's very easily replaceable in essentially any team comp that you slot him into. Once you get good enough at the game, you'll start to feel like he's sort of dragging down your Abyss performance as opposed to propping it up. We happen to live in a day and age where we're completely flooded with fantastic supports, so we're not strapped for alternatives whatsoever. You'd rather a unit that can contribute to your team more offensively. Sure, he doesn't only offer shielding as we discussed earlier, however, everything that he provides combined is never going to be able to compete with the sheer quality of buffs that characters like Shilonen and Kazuha are able to provide. This is one of the biggest drawbacks about Zhongli. No matter what, the guy's always going to negatively affect your team's damage output with the expectation of Ito Mono Geo teams. Furthering that point is his slow freaking burst. Does it look cool? Absolutely. Will he have order? 100%. Is the animation so slow to the point where it ends up being a damage loss in every non-Ito Mono Geo team? Yup. This would be fine if the damage of the meteorite was high enough to compensate for how long it takes to descend upon enemies. Sure, it offers some crowd control, but said crowd control is super short-lived and barely affects your clears most of the time. It's not worth the casting time. You'd rather never use his burst and utilize that extra field time to generate particles of your other characters. Yet as it stands, no incentive at all to use it. But what if I build him as a sub-DPS? His damage was underwhelming back then, and it's only become a lot lamer over time. Not worth the resource cost whatsoever, and not worth the animation time either. Steer clear of sub-DPS Lee. Remember when I said that him being super duper free-to-play accessible had another side to it which was not so great? Well, Vortex Vanquisher. Must I say more? It's so disappointing that this freaking weapon does next to nothing for either of his playstyles. It looks really cool, dude. Most nonsense weapon ever. This is simply early days of Genshin tier kit design. After all, early Genshin is the same place that gave us Zhongli's constellations. Who actually wants this garbage? Sure, the C2 makes it so that using his burst isn't so bad anymore because it refreshes his shield in the process, but why would you want an extra stone pillar? To make a double wiener? His C6 works with Arena, which is dandy, but my man, you have plenty of inexpensive healer options which will get the job done for you just fine. It's so funny that his C6 has a use now because in the past it was just straight up garbage. You gotta be the biggest Zhongli simp on this Archon's Green to Vat if you're thinking of pulling for any of these. I beg of you, pull for Staff of Homa instead if you really want to run a high investment sub DPS Lee. It's a big waste of a perfectly good Staff of Homa, but hey man, that's your call to make. The best way that I can describe Zhongli is that he is the most subjective character in Genshin Impact. For so many people, he is an S tier unit because of how easy he makes gameplay feel. He is the ultimate comfort option while carrying infinite versatility, which appeals to plenty of folks. I have a hard time naming one DPS in recent times that physically cannot use this guy whatsoever. However, on the other hand, he'll be a B tier character at best if you're really good at the game, or are a speedrunner which would prefer to use a strong buff or a sub DPS in his place. It entirely depends on your personal values when it comes to ranking how good you think this guy is, so if you really want him, ask yourself, is he going to improve your gameplay experience or inhibit it more than anything else? And ask many different types of players what they think about him, because you'll get vastly different answers between a new player, an experienced casual, a good player, and a complete speedrunner. He's good in my opinion, but far from a must. It entirely depends on circumstance with this fella. Hopefully this video was able to tell you Zhongli's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and if there's one thing about this guy which is never going to change no matter how many banners of him we receive, it's that he's always gonna have one of the most banger trailers and theme songs in all of Genshin Impact.